40,000 years ago, the land that would become France was a frozen steppe at the edge of the Ice Age. No kings, no borders, no language. Just small groups of people following herds across a landscape shaped by glaciers. And yet, from that starting point, this territory would become the most populous kingdom in medieval Western Europe, and eventually build the world's second largest colonial empire. Extending over 13.5 million square kilometers at its height in the 1920s and 1930s. That is roughly 20 times the size of the country that ruled it. Here is the central puzzle. France is smaller than Texas. It has no natural barrier on its northeastern frontier. For most of this story, it did not exist. It was conquered by Rome, raided by Vikings, split apart by civil war, devastated by plague, occupied, bankrupted, and nearly erased more than once. So how does a place like that end up governing more people overseas than it had living at home? That is what this video is actually about. Not just the kings and the battles, though there are plenty of both, but the repeating cycle underneath all of it. Population generates armies. Armies expand borders. Expansion creates wealth, rivals, and overreach. Then war, disease, or political collapse tears the whole system apart, and a different France rises from what remains. We are going to follow that cycle from the Ice Age all the way to the present. And somewhere in the middle, I want you to hold on to one question, because the answer is not what you expect. How does a country that loses two entire colonial empires end up spanning more time zones than any other nation on Earth? That answer is coming. But first, we need to go back to the walls. Around 37,000 years ago, people were visiting a cave in what is now southern France. Humans used the cave from 37,000 to 33,500 years ago, and again from 31,000 to 28,000 years ago. We call it Chauvet. The walls are covered in lions, bison, horses, and woolly rhinoceroses. These results show that 37,000 years ago, humans were already capable of creating masterpieces. The artists used the natural curves of the rock to suggest motion. In torchlight, some of the animals appear to run. Long before French kings advertised power through palaces, people in this territory were already using walls to create spectacle. That instinct, to make the world watch, will keep showing up. The first great transformation did not come from a conqueror. It came from the climate. As the world warmed out of the Ice Age, forests expanded, farming spread, and permanent settlements multiplied. By the first millennium BCE, several million people may have lived across the region the Romans called Gaul. But Gaul was not one country. It was a shifting collection of tribes, towns, and alliances. Wealthy, fragmented, and because of that combination, extremely vulnerable. On the Mediterranean coast, Greek settlers had already founded Massalia, modern Marseille, around 600 BCE. It traded across the Mediterranean centuries before Paris mattered politically. Gaul had farmland, metalworking, trade, and wealthy elites. Prosperity had created a prize. Fragmentation made that prize easy to take. That combination attracted Julius Caesar. Between 58 and 50 BCE, Caesar's armies swept through Gaul. Vercingetorix briefly united several Gallic groups and nearly turned the campaign around. But his defeat at Alesia ended the largest coordinated resistance. The demographic shock was enormous. Independent Gallic communities became Roman provinces. Roads linked cities to military posts and ports. Taxes moved toward imperial centers. Wine, pottery, grain, and people moved through the same network. Towns like Lugdunum, modern Lyon, grew into major administrative hubs. Over centuries, local elites adopted Roman law, citizenship, and language. The Latin spoken in Gaul gradually developed into the ancestor of French. Rome did not create France, but it built much of the platform from which France would later emerge: cities, roads, law, Christianity, and a habit of governing territory through administration. there is also a small lesson buried in what happened to Vercingetorix after his defeat. He became a major national hero in the 19th century, almost 2,000 years after losing. Nations do not merely inherit history, they also edit it. For centuries, the Roman system made Gaul richer, more connected, and easier to govern. But it also made the territory dependent on an empire whose strength could not last. By the 4th and 5th centuries, Roman authority in Western Europe was failing. Civil wars, fiscal strain, and migration weakened the empire's ability to govern Gaul. Visigoths, Burgundians, Franks, and surviving Roman elites competed for control. The territory had not disappeared, but political authority had shattered. The Franks eventually gained the advantage. Under Clovis, they conquered much of Gaul around the beginning of the 6th century. His conversion to Catholic Christianity was more than a spiritual decision. It aligned his dynasty with bishops and the much larger Gallo-Roman population. A Germanic ruling group gave the future country its name. Roman Gaul gave it its language and religion. Neither side was trying to create a modern nation. They were just trying to survive the century. Frankish power reached its widest extent under Charlemagne, whose empire covered much of Western and Central Europe, modern France, large parts of Germany and Italy, and territory beyond them. It looked like the first great summit of the story, but it concealed a fatal weakness. The empire was a family possession held together by personal loyalty. After Charlemagne's son Louis the Pious died, his grandsons divided the inheritance in the Treaty of Verdun in 843. West Francia became the principal political ancestor of France. One of Europe's longest geopolitical rivalries began partly because three relatives could not agree on the family estate. Before West Francia could become a coherent kingdom, however, raiders exposed how little power its kings actually possessed. During the 9th and 10th centuries, Viking raiders used the Atlantic coast and rivers as highways into the interior. Paris itself was attacked. Trade was disrupted, settlements were abandoned or fortified, and the raids exposed a humiliating truth. The king claimed a large realm, but could not reliably defend it. So in 911, the crown tried something remarkably practical. It granted land around the Lower Seine to the Viking leader Rollo in exchange for loyalty and defense against other raiders. That territory became Normandy. The government's answer to its Viking problem was essentially to hire a Viking and give him the office keys. The raids faded, but they left power scattered among regional lords. By 987, when Hugh Capet became king, royal France was surprisingly small. The king's direct domain was concentrated around Paris and Orléans. Several nobles controlled more land and military power than he did. On a political map, the kingdom looked impressive. On a map of territory the king actually controlled, it looked alarmingly thin. The Capetians did not solve this through one spectacular conquest. They arranged marriages, inherited estates, purchased land, confiscated property, exploited feudal law, and fought when necessary. Their real advantage was the Paris Bassin, rich farmland, navigable rivers, and routes connecting north and south. As agriculture improved and population grew, the crown gained more taxes and more manpower. Geography did not guarantee a unified France, but it gave Paris an excellent place from which to build one. And then one marriage almost reversed the entire process. Eleanor of Aquitaine's marriage to the future Henry II of England in 1152 placed vast territories in western France within the Plantagenet sphere. After Henry became King of England, he controlled more French land than the French king did directly. The Channel was not yet a clean national border. One ruler could govern England while holding French lands as a vassal of the French crown. Medieval politics resembled a legal argument with castles. Philip II of France used that legal confusion to his advantage. In 1204, he confiscated Normandy and other Plantagenet lands, then backed the decision with armies. Normandy, Anjou, Maine, and Touraine moved into the royal domain. English power in France contracted toward the southwest. His victory at Bouvines in 1214 made the change harder to reverse. Philip defeated a coalition that included the English king's allies and the Holy Roman Emperor, and the battle strengthened the monarchy while weakening rival nobles. A war presented as a clash of kings had quietly determined which government collected taxes from entire regions afterward. Victory in the north strengthened the crown, but the south remained culturally and politically distinct. The Albigensian Crusade, which began in 1209 as a campaign against the Cathar religious movement, became a vehicle for northern nobles and the monarchy to push into Languedoc. Religious war and state building arrived wearing the same armour. By the early 14th century, the lands within today's French borders probably held roughly 17 to 20 million people. France was the demographic giant of Western Europe. Its population may have been around 3 times England's. More people meant more crops, more taxes, more towns, more soldiers, and more royal ambition. This was medieval France's first great demographic summit. It was also the moment everything went wrong at once. The 100 Years' War began in 1337. The Black Death arrived in 1348 after earlier famines had already weakened communities. Plague killed an enormous share of the population, returned in later waves, and struck regions unevenly. War added raids, destroyed harvests, displaced civilians, and made recovery harder. The state lost taxpayers at exactly the moment it needed more money to survive. English armies won at Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt. The Treaty of Troyes in 1420 recognized the English king's heir as successor to the French throne, while northern France fell under English and Allied control. A kingdom that had been the demographic giant of Western Europe was being partitioned. Joan of Arc entered a conflict that was not simply France versus England. Burgundian forces captured her before transferring her to the English. French nobles fought on both sides. The 100 Years' War was also a French civil war. Joan's military career lasted roughly 1 extraordinary year, but the recovery continued through less cinematic forces: taxation, artillery, administration, and diplomacy. Charles VII created more dependable revenue and permanent military units. Burgundy abandoned its alliance with England. By 1453, England had lost nearly all its French territories except Calais. Compare 1420 with 1453. A kingdom that had nearly lost its dynasty and capital had restored most of its territory. Its population, however, would take generations to recover. France had won with fewer people than it possessed when the war began, and yet the monarchy was stronger than before, because the crisis had forced it to build better tools of government. The kingdom then filled in more of the modern outline. After Charles the Bold of Burgundy died in 1477, Louis XI absorbed the Duchy of Burgundy. Provence joined the crown in the late 15th century. Brittany was tied to France through dynastic marriages and formally united in 1532. Some of the monarchy's largest gains came not from brilliant battles, but from well-timed deaths and extremely strategic weddings. The monarchy had escaped destruction and enlarged its territory. Success now created a new temptation. French kings invaded Italy beginning in 1494. The wars promised wealth and glory, but instead revealed a terrifying strategic problem. Through inheritance and marriage, the Habsburg dynasty controlled Spain, the Low Countries, Austria, parts of Italy, and the imperial title. France seemed surrounded. Francis I answered with an alliance that horrified many Christian observers. Catholic France cooperated with the Muslim Ottoman Empire against the Habsburgs. Religion mattered deeply until geography mattered more. One of the most enduring rules of French statecraft was now visible. When surrounded, find an ally that makes everyone uncomfortable. The Habsburg ring failed to crush France from outside. The next threat came from within. From 1562 to 1598, the wars of religion fractured the kingdom between Catholics and Protestants. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572 killed thousands. Towns armed themselves, noble factions built private forces, and royal authority weakened. Henry IV restored a measure of unity. His supposed declaration that Paris is worth a mass may be apocryphal, but his conversion to Catholicism was politically useful. The Edict of Nantes in 1598 granted limited protections to Protestants and helped the monarchy rebuild. Once again, France survived not because disagreement disappeared, but because the state found a temporary way to contain it. During the 17th century, French power pushed towards stronger frontiers. Wars and treaties brought control over Artois, Roussillon, parts of Alsace, and Franche-Comté. Under Louis XIV, France became Europe's most powerful continental monarchy, with a population near 20 million around 1700. The crown had more land, more officials, more soldiers, and more international prestige than any medieval king could have imagined. Versailles was both palace and control system. Nobles competed for ceremonies and access, while royal officials governed the provinces. The aristocracy fought over who could hold a candle near the monarch. The peasantry worried about holding on to dinner. In 1685, Louis revoked the Edict of Nantes and intensified pressure on Protestants. Despite restrictions on emigration, perhaps hundreds of thousands of Huguenots left over time for England, the Dutch Republic, the German states, and destinations farther away. France exported skilled artisans, merchants, soldiers, and knowledge to several of its competitors. Religious uniformity strengthened the king's image of control while weakening parts of the society he controlled. Lorraine entered France in 1766. Genoa transferred its rights over Corsica in 1768, and French forces secured the island in 1769. Metropolitan borders were approaching their modern form. Yet, while the European map became more complete, France had created another, far larger and far less stable map across North America, the Caribbean, Africa, and India. That first colonial empire produced both wealth and catastrophe. John Law's Mississippi Company encouraged speculation in the supposed riches of Louisiana. When the bubble collapsed in 1720, it triggered a major financial crash and discredited paper money in France for generations. The episode proved that France could lose a fortune in America without most investors ever seeing America. The 7 Years' War brought a more concrete defeat. In 1763, France lost Canada and much of its position in North America and India. France later helped the American colonies defeat Britain, but gained more debt and little territory. Meanwhile, metropolitan population rose from about 21 million early in the century to roughly 28 million by 1789. More people increased output and military potential, but also pressure on food and an unequal tax system. Harvest crises, privilege, debt, and fiscal paralysis made the monarchy increasingly unstable. France had gained people while losing the financial room to govern them. The Revolution of 1789 changed government and the organization of space. Feudal privileges and old provincial structures were abolished. France was divided into standardized departments. The revolutionaries even created a new calendar and experimented with 10-hour decimal days. The calendar outlived decimal time, but both reveal the same ambition. Replacing the king was not enough. Apparently, Tuesday also needed reform. War accelerated the transformation. France declared war on Austria in April 1792. Other monarchies joined the conflict, and invasion followed. The levée en masse mobilized people and resources on a scale older monarchies struggled to match. A patchwork kingdom was becoming a centralized nation-state capable of mass warfare. The monarchy had collapsed, but the machinery created in the crisis could project more power than the monarchy ever had. Napoleon drove that system to its extreme. By 1811, the French Empire itself contained 130 departments stretching from the North Sea into Italy, while allied and dependent states covered much of continental Europe. On the map, this was the largest direct territorial France had ever controlled. Beneath the map, resistance, blockades, conscription, and permanent war were making it unsustainable. the invasion of Russia in 1812 shattered the Grande Armée. Paris fell in 1814, Napoleon briefly returned, and Waterloo ended the experiment in 1815. France contracted to borders close to those it had held before the revolutionary expansion. Overseas, the Haitian Revolution destroyed Napoleon's plan to rebuild a Caribbean empire. Enslaved and formerly enslaved people defeated attempts to restore French control, while disease devastated Napoleon's expedition. Without Saint-Domingue as an imperial center, Louisiana looked less useful. France sold the enormous Louisiana territory to the United States in 1803. At the exact moment France was expanding across Europe, it was abandoning a claim that would nearly double the territory of the young United States. France had now tested two models of expansion, an Atlantic empire and a European empire. Both had expanded rapidly, and both had collapsed under war, resistance, and overreach. After 1815, French leaders would search for a third route to global power, one that avoided conquering Europe by moving expansion overseas. Here is where the story gets strange. And here is where we get back to that open question about time zones. France began conquering Algeria in 1830. Savoy and Nice were added in 1860. Defeat by Prussia in 1871 removed Alsace and part of Lorraine, creating a territorial wound that shaped French politics for nearly 50 years. The loss was modest in area compared with Napoleon's vanished empire, but enormous in national memory. And while that wound was still fresh, France was quietly assembling something much larger. The Second Colonial Empire was not one clean plan. It accumulated through conquest, treaties, protectorates, and commercial pressure. Algeria became the central North African possession. Tunisia and Morocco became protectorates. France created federations in West and Equatorial Africa, conquered Madagascar, assembled French Indochina from modern Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, and held islands and ports across 3 oceans. During the 19th and 20th centuries, the French colonial empire was the second largest colonial empire in the world, only behind the British Empire, extending over 13.5 million square kilometres at its peak in the 1920s and 1930s. That is France's greatest territorial summit. And like the empires of Charlemagne, Louis XIV, and Napoleon, it looked most impressive on the eve of a crisis that would expose how fragile the system really was. The empire also changed who fought for France. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers from Africa, North Africa, Indochina, Madagascar, and other colonies served during the First World War. The Republic asked people without equal political rights to defend its claim to liberty. The war killed about 1.4 million French servicemen and devastated industrial regions in the north and east. France recovered Alsace and Lorraine in 1919. Territorial victory concealed demographic trauma. The war also produced one of the stranger defense projects in history, a decoy Paris built northeast of the capital with fake stations, illuminated streets, and industrial zones intended to confuse German bombers. Only part of it was completed before the armistice. France had become so centralized that defending it apparently required inventing a spare Paris. The Eiffel Tower survived for a similarly practical reason. Built for the 1889 World's Fair and intended to stand for only 20 years, it escaped demolition because it proved useful for science and radio. A temporary structure became France's permanent symbol because engineers found a reason not to discard it. That is a very French outcome. In 1931, Paris hosted a huge colonial exposition presenting empire as prosperous, modern, and loyal. Yet anti-colonial movements were already growing across North Africa, West Africa, Madagascar, and Indochina. The same imperial network that moved soldiers and goods also moved students, workers, political ideas, and resistance. The map looked solid because maps cannot show resentment. Then the continental weakness beneath the global map was exposed. Germany invaded in May 1940, and France was defeated in about 6 weeks. The North and Atlantic coast were occupied. The Vichy regime governed from the south while collaborating with Germany. The Republic temporarily disappeared, but the empire complicated the defeat. Charles de Gaulle's Free France initially possessed little territory in Europe. Chad and much of French Equatorial Africa rallied to him in 1940, providing land, troops, and political legitimacy. Colonial soldiers formed a major part of Free French forces. The empire that undermined France's claim to equality also helped preserve France's claim to exist. Men recruited from Africa and North Africa helped liberate a European state that still denied many of them equal citizenship. Liberation in 1944 restored French sovereignty, but it did not restore the old world. The contradiction between liberation in Europe and colonial rule overseas had become impossible to hide. France had regained the mainland just as it was beginning to lose the global map. Decolonization was not a polite administrative withdrawal. It came through wars, repression, negotiation, and independence movements. France lost the war in Indochina after the defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. Morocco and Tunisia became independent in 1956. Across sub-Saharan Africa, most French colonies gained independence in 1960. In less than a generation, enormous blocks of color disappeared from the imperial map. Algeria was the most traumatic case. France had governed it not simply as a colony, but as departments of France, while about 1 million European settlers lived there. The Algerian War from 1954 to 1962 involved guerrilla warfare, terrorism, torture, repression, and mass displacement. It destabilized the French state so severely that the Fourth Republic collapsed. Charles de Gaulle returned to power, and the Constitution of 1958 created the Fifth Republic with a stronger presidency. France tested its first atomic bomb in the Algerian Sahara in 1960, even as Algeria moved toward independence. The image captures the contradiction perfectly. France was proving it had entered the nuclear age while losing control of the territory beneath the explosion. When Algeria became independent in 1962, the imperial map contracted again. But the demographic story moved in the opposite direction. Metropolitan France had about 40 million people in 1946 and more than 46 million by 1962. A post-war baby boom, improving health, and immigration drove rapid growth. People from former colonies moved to metropolitan France before, during, and after decolonization. France was becoming geographically smaller while becoming more populous and more socially connected to the territories it had lost. The imperial story came home. Now here is the answer to the question I planted at the beginning. Not every overseas possession became independent. Newer remnants of the colonial empire were integrated into France as overseas departments and territories within the French Republic, totaling altogether 119,394 square kilometers with 2.8 million people in 2021. Guadeloupe, Martinique, French Guiana, Réunion, Mayotte, French Polynesia, New Caledonia, and several smaller territories remained within different constitutional relationships to France. They are not colonies frozen in time. Each has its own legal status, political debates, and history. But together, they are the reason France today spans 12 standard time zones, more than any other country on Earth. Somewhere under French sovereignty, the sun is always above the horizon. That is how a country, repeatedly invaded, divided, and reduced, kept returning as a major power. France's real talent was never permanent expansion. It was the ability to lose land, people, dynasties, empires, and political systems, and construct another France from what remained. Fertile land became population. Population became armies. Conquest became administration. Defeat became reform. And even a lost empire left behind a global network that no map of France quite captures. 40,000 years ago, the people painting lions on the walls of Chauvet had no idea what was coming. They left behind art because something in them needed to make the world pay attention. That instinct did not go away. It just kept finding new walls. If this changed the way you see the map, Share it with someone who thinks France is only Paris, pastries and revolutions. And if you want to follow the same cycle through another civilization, how a different crossroads territory built, lost, and rebuilt an empire of its own. The next video is already waiting for you. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Drop a comment telling me which part of this 40,000-year story surprised you most. I read every single one.